In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto the ages of all ages, amen. So, I remember once I was 14 years old, and I was sitting in the car with my parents. We had gone to visit someone they know, a friend of theirs, who had multiple sclerosis. He's gone on to, he's passed on now. And we were on our way home on a Sunday afternoon, evening, and I say to my dad, look, I think all of my friends have gone to this other friend's house. Can you drop me off there on the way home? And my dad says to me, why'd you have to go where your friends go? And we get into this conversation about why I want to do what my friends are doing. And it ends with my dad going, oh, and putting his hands on the steering wheel and going, you have no character, right? And that was the beginning of me. That was the first time and the last time anybody told me I didn't have enough character, you know? And it was the beginning of me finding my character, realizing I have to find my own character. And I think all of us have various memories of our parents telling us not to do things, or our parents not allowing us to do things, or us wanting to go somewhere, or wear something, or go to somebody's house for a sleepover, I don't know what, right? And our parents kind of like laying down the law. And sometimes we view God in the same way, right? And it's not for no reason. The passage that we're going to kind of like follow along with for the next couple of weeks is Jesus saying this: if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than your whole body be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And most of us read this or hear this and say, what are you talking about? You know? And I've been to church, and I've been to lots of churches, and I've met lots of people who really seem to follow Jesus, and most of them had both their eyes and both their hands. So I don't know what you're talking about, Jesus. And if heaven is a place where everybody's missing a right eye and a right hand and a right leg, you know, I'm not so sure I want to be there unless, like, I'm a prosthesis salesman. Then, you know, maybe, like, you know, things will be kind of good for me, right? And we see these prohibitions. These, don't do this, don't do that, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And we look at this and we're like, why? Like, forgive me, why not? You know? And why is it always, you can't do this and you can't do that, right? Now, I have another question for you, other than why is it you can't do this, you can't do that. But I have another question for you. Why is it hard for us to hear, don't do this, don't do that? Why is it hard for us to hear that? Let's mull over that for the next 20 minutes while we're together, right? Why is it that, like, broccoli can't be healthy for you? Well, I mean, it is healthy for you, but why can't it taste good? Like, why can't it be like broccoli and chocolate? I was like, you know, I actually just Googled like a picture of like broccoli and chocolate to put on the screen. And then I bumped into this thing. There's this whole movement again amongst mothers. I mean, I guess it's parents in general, but it was a mother's, specifically a mother's website, of how moms are trying to make the food that they offer to their children, which is healthy, appealing. And this whole chocolate broccoli movement, it's like a whole movement of trying to make things which are good for you appealing, right? But why can't I just have the chocolate? Like, why can't I just eat chocolate all day, right? And I know you know answers to that question, and I know answers to that question, right? But we're not talking about broccoli and chocolate today. We're talking about things that you want to do, or you think you want to do, or things that kind of bite, when it really bites when you hear, don't do this, or don't do that, right? So, the first thing I'm going to suggest is that things are not always the way they seem. I've developed this new hobby of trying to find out who was the first person to say something. So I guess Plato wrote a work called Phaedrus, and Phaedrus is the main character in this work by Plato in about 370 BC, and he says, things are not always what they seem. The first appearance deceives many. The intelligence of the few perceives what has been carefully hidden. Anyhow, needless to say, things are not always what they seem. And I'm sure we've all had experiences of that. We've all wanted to get, all day we've been thinking about that burger, that slice of pizza, or that whatever, and you sink your teeth into it, and it's not quite as what you expected it to be. There's this person you've always wanted to meet, you've always wanted to talk to, you had an opportunity to talk to them, and the experience was not quite what you had hoped for, and so on, and so on, and so on. I'm sure we've all had those experiences that didn't quite match up to what we imagined them to be. And sometimes our imagination makes more of things or less of things than their reality. And that's going to be a big part of what we're going to be talking about, is the difference between our perception and our imagination and our reality. Like, I see, and then I imagine, and then there's a reality. And not all of that always matches up. And sometimes things are not what they seem. The deer isn't crossing the road, it's the road that's crossing the forest, And we're asking ourselves, why the heck is this deer in my way? And the real question is, why are you crossing in the path of the deer? Who was here first? And at work, we'd oftentimes say things like, if it looks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Probably is a very fair word to use, but there are a lot of things that look like a duck, and walk like a duck, and sound like a duck, and aren't a duck. And this kind of opens up the opportunity to say that things are not always as they seem. There's more than meets the eye. And all of our experiences are like this. I have a friend who is an IT contractor. Like he just does contract work. So I was asking him how he quotes his work. He says it's really simple. I look at the job, I ask myself, he's very optimistic. He's similar to me. We were having a conversation about time management. Right, I'm too optimistic in the fact that I'll say that I think I can do like 5 things in an afternoon, when in reality, like any normal human being would only try to do 2 of those things, right? But because I'm optimistic, right? So I asked him, how do you quote your jobs? He said, I look at how long I think it's going to take me to do, and then I multiply it by 5, and that's what I quote them for. And if it's a difficult client, I multiply that by 2, so I multiply it by 10. I'm like, you literally charge them 10 times the hours that you thought it would take? He says, yeah, because I know with some clients, I know that I underestimate the time. So it's going to go from 1 to like 4, or 3.5, or 4.5, or whatever, right? And then if it's a difficult client, he's going to give it back to me and tell me to do it all over again, right? And so on. There's more than meets the eye. There's more than what we perceive. There's more than what we imagine to be there. And this works in the positive, and it works it kind of in the negative. And in Proverbs, it says this twice. I learned in high school, and it served me very well in university and the rest of my life, if somebody says the same exact thing to you twice, they're either senile or they're trying to get a point to you. Like, this is important. This is the way people say, this is really important, without saying, this is really important. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is death. Is quoted verbatim from Proverbs 14:12 and 16:25. In different contexts, same exact words. Maybe I ought to listen up, right? So how do you know if something is what it is? Well, we kind of used the duck thing a little earlier. Let's kind of keep going on with that, right? So, looking back at my past life in medicine, there are like 7 signs of life that we oftentimes refer to, right? Movement, breathing, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. You don't need to memorize them, but the point is this, like the ability to move, the ability to function, the ability to feel. You know, are you able to do things? Are you able to receive inputs if you're supposed to? If it's an inanimate object, obviously it's not going to do those things, right? Is it supposed to grow? Is it growing? Is it supposed to reproduce or multiply? Is it growing? Is it multiplying? Excretion and nutrition, right? And you could, you know what, when I'm thinking about this, I was like, you know what, you could apply this to business, okay? Like, is the business responsive? You know, everybody, you know, you sell t-shirts, right? And all the red t-shirts sell out and the blue ones don't. You know, and then you go to your supplier, like, well, I guess we ran out of red t-shirts, so let's order another 100 red and another 100 blue. Well, there's a problem there, right? There's a problem there. We're not receiving stimuli. This business is going to go under, right? Because they're receiving stimuli, but they're not doing anything with it. So the business is supposed to grow, is supposed to change, it's supposed to grow. After a few years, I don't know, they franchise or they take the storefront next door, something. If it's a healthy business, it should be growing. In medicine with children, there's actually a diagnosis called failure to thrive. I think I've mentioned it before. Like if a child isn't growing, that sometimes it's the only sign to like very bad health. It could be nutritional, it could be emotional, it could be cancer, it could be all kinds of things. We go wild when we see a child not growing along the growth chart like they're supposed to. And we kind of talked about that in our previous series, right? Just some ideas for us to think about. How you can look at something which looks like it's in good health and ask yourself, but is it really? Like, is this really as it ought to be, or is it not? Jesus says, what does Jesus say? Like, how can we distinguish? How can we kind of like, you know, draw the line with things which are and things which are not, and things which should be and things which are not what they should be? He says you will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Jesus is saying, like, if you look at two trees and they look very similar, wait till the season where their fruits come out. If one of them gives you this fruit and the other one gives you that fruit, that means they have similar leaves, but that they're not the same tree. Wait and see what kind of comes out of it. Wait and see what it produces. I want to get real personal and real practical, okay? Why did people invent cell phones? Well, Alexander Bell, I think, invented the telephone because it was like this revolution that you could not only communicate by telegraph to somebody, but you could hear them. So it bumped up the level of communication, because now you're losing a lot of the nonverbal in written communication, but now you could hear them, you could hear their intonation, you could hear their pauses. You weren't just getting a telegraph. So the purpose, and I'm not going to need to work hard to convince you of this, of phones in general, is communication. To connect people to others. And then you have to, I'm from the world where we had landlines, and I still remember a dial tone phone. I was amazed, I was shocked beyond when my parents had a little phone with the little dial thing, the little circles, and you dial it, a toy one. And my daughter, who's 1.5, knew what it was. And it made me realize, why do I not think she should know? Because she's never seen one anywhere else. But somehow, she knew, maybe from cartoons or something, she knew what it was. So there's been this massive evolution of phones. And I guess it's up to us to ask ourselves now, is this still doing what it was made to do? And like now, like Apple gives you like a screen time report every week and lets you know if you're using your phone more, if you're using it less, and you can go and see what you're using it for. You know what I mean? My highest screen time is on Google Maps and Audible. That says that I spend a lot of time in the car. But who am I using Google Maps and Audible with? Me. Who am I communicating with? Me. Who am I connecting with? Me. This has no longer become a device of communication. It's become a personal entertainment device. And I guess it's up to each one of us to ask ourselves, is that right? And I'm not saying that it's wrong or that it's right. I don't work for, Apple or Samsung or nobody, right? But it's up to each one of us to ask ourselves, and to say, hey, this is great. I listened to 4.5 hours of audiobooks this week. That's awesome. That would have been time I would have spent daydreaming or judging people in my head or whatever. You know what I mean? This is fantastic. Or to say, no, this is not cool. Like, that's like half or 3/4 of a work day that I spent just listening when I could have spent that time doing something else. But one thing is for sure, phones were made for communication. We are not using them for their function anymore, as much as we're using them for other things. And I guess it's up to each one of us to ask ourselves why, and if that's okay or not. But my phone is more than what it appears to be. Food. Food is for nutrition. Or at least, that's what they told us. That's what they told me about the broccoli when I was a kid. That's how they sold it to me. If you eat your broccoli, you'll be strong and you'll be able to play in the jungle gym. Like, I don't know, that's what my parents told me. I think I'm going to sue them, right? Because that doesn't turn out to be what I use food for. In fact, I've learned that I can go a day, sometimes 2, without almost eating at all, if I just drink enough water and have some coffee, right? What is food for? Is it actually for nutrition? Or maybe what I have access to that I call food is not really food at all. Maybe we're using 2 words to talk about the same thing. But needless to say, it is not as it appears. And you think food, you think nutrition. You think you haven't eaten all day. Oh my God, you must be starving. And these images of the little starving children in Africa, you know what I mean? All I need to do is take a shower. No little starving child in Africa over here, What's going on with that? How about climbing the corporate ladder, the ladder of professional success? Everything is told us. This is what you do. You go to school, you get the best marks you can so you can get a good job. You get the best job you can. And then you start, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and climbing the ladder, right? Or if you work for yourself, if you're a business person, the goal of business is to make money. Now, there are other very laudable goals of business, which I totally believe in, but the goal of business is to make money, and more money is better than less money. Is it? Is it really? I have lots of friends now who pass up promotions because they know that promotion comes with a lifestyle. And I kind of like my lifestyle. I'll take a raise, but I'm not sure I want the promotion. I'm not sure I want a change in my lifestyle. I'm not sure I want that anymore. But bigger is better. More is better, right? Wrong? I don't know. I'm not saying this and I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that sometimes things don't appear as they really are. I'm old enough to know who this guy is. This is Lucien Bouchard, who was the premier of Quebec from 1996 to 2001. And he's the founder of the opposition party, and sometimes it's the leading party in the province of Quebec, called the Bloc Québécois. and he is the central figure of the 1995 referendum for the yes side. Yes, Quebec should separate from Canada. So he's a separatist, and he's kind of like the spearhead champion of Quebec separatism. Regardless of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and which side of the fence you're on. Like, part of Canada is like, why should they separate? The rest of Canada is like, good riddance, go away, right? But regardless of all of that, in 1994, so I guess a year or two before he became premier, he had an infection with a flesh-eating bacteria of his leg, and he was rushed to hospital and had an immediate amputation. That condition is called necrotizing fasciitis, and it can spread, and there's surgeons in the room, it can spread within hours, less than a day, to basically cause like the entire death of the tissues that it infects. So in this case, it was his leg. Usually, the only thing we can do is immediate surgery. Like, we really literally rush that patient to the operating room, find where the healthiest tissue is, and cut it off. And oftentimes, where you think the healthy tissue starts and the dead tissue ends, oftentimes you're wrong. Oftentimes, the extent is much further. It progresses so fast that sometimes the skin above it is even still alive, but everything underneath is dead. Tissues, nerves, muscles, fat. But the skin, the envelope has managed to stay alive. It's, I remember the first time I dealt with necrotizing fasciitis, I was with my senior resident, and we got consulted, and she took one, she poked, it was a patient's belly, and she kind of poked his belly just briefly, and it was bubbling. It was like, you order something in the mail, Amazon, you get, and then the bubble wrap, snap, crackle, pop, and then she says to me, she took a scalpel out of her pocket, it was in a sterile sheath. She took it out of the seat, she handed it to me, and she says to me, I'm gonna distract him, and you just cut a little slit into his abdomen, and we're going to take a few swabs and send it to the lab, and we'll probably rush him off to the operating room right away. And I'm like, yeah, usually when you cut somebody, you give them an anesthetic. And she turns to me, she's like, that's because usually the thing you're cutting is alive. And I didn't realize at all that, he couldn't feel anything because the nerves were dead, right? I cut like a little, slit, like half a centimeter, stuck a little, Q-tip in there, to not like the sterile one, to for the swab, and sent it off to the lab, and we rushed him off to the operating room. He lost half of his abdominal wall in a matter of minutes, hours. But it looks alive. It looks alive. But unless you know, I didn't know what I was looking for that first time that I saw that with my senior resident. She knew, thank God for the patient, right? If you don't know that it can look alive but really be dead, then, we're talking about an amputation here. We're talking about cutting somebody's leg or their arm off. This is serious business. And we're not planning to put it back on. We're planning to send it down to, to the lab. It's not coming back. This is really serious. But you wouldn't do that unless you thought that it was worth it. Unless you thought that it couldn't be saved. So that's the question. That's the question with these things. That's the question. Before you drive by Staples on your way home and take your cell phone, which you're currently using with its SIM card, and drop it in their electronic waste recycling. After me talking about cell phones, before you decide to live on water, like I was just talking about, before you decide to throw something out or to keep something, we ask ourselves, is it what it's supposed to be? And if it's not, can it be saved? Is it possible that it could be saved? Or is it corrupted beyond recognition? Is it like rotting beyond salvage? And St. Athanasius talks about that on the Incarnation. He says beautiful things, and I've tried to select just a few passages for you. And he's talking about what we're here doing on earth and what our plan is, on earth. And he says that God created us in paradise with the potential to live immortal, unified to God, as long as we are unified to God. In our disobedience, then it starts here, then turning from eternal things to things corruptible by the counsel of the devil, they had become the cause of their own corruption in death. When this happened, men began to die, and corruption ran riot among them and held sway over them. So, inasmuch as we were united with God, and as much as we were walking hand in hand with God in paradise, we were preserved. He was like our preservative, We were preserved by the life of God. But when we turned from eternal things to corruptible things, we became the cause of our own corruption. And then corruption ran riot, went wild within us, and has sway over us. So, in a certain sense, if you allow, we were walking hand in hand with God, and we cut that and went away. If we were holding on to something over here, it's only kind of like logical to think that when we turned away from this direction and we turned to this direction, we just grabbed on to hold of something over there. Now this has become the cause of our corruption. So if we want a restoration of health, we're probably going to have to let go of what's over here to hold back on over here. There's going to have to be a cutting off. But the trouble is, the thing over here sometimes just is too good to let go of, right? He goes on to say, they had in their sinning surpassed all limits, for having invented wickedness in the beginning, and so involved themselves in death and corruption. They had gone on gradually from bad to worse, not stopping at any one kind of evil, but continually, as with insatiable appetite, devising new kinds of sins. He goes on to say, while each one and each generation strove to outdo the one before it in wickedness. It became like a competition from one generation to the next. Who could be the more wicked? Looking at some of our examples that we used earlier, so I guess there's a 10,000 calorie challenge. So I was like Googling pictures for the 10,000 calorie challenge, have something to stick on this slide, and I thought, you know what, guess what? There's a 20,000 calorie challenge. That's not like 20,000 calories in a month. That's 20,000 calories in a day. In a day. Right? And I have all these pictures I don't want to go there, right? So, something people talk to me about sometimes, multiple people talk to me about sometimes, we talk about phones, we talk about video games, right? Somebody asked me why, one of the kids, he asked me why I don't play video games. And I told him because I get so easily addicted. If I'll start playing, it'll be like 5 in the morning before I'll stop, right? And the kid obviously looked back at me and said, "What's wrong with that?" Right? You don't have a mommy or a daddy who'll tell you to stop, so you're lucky. That's good, right? Lucky you, right? So the longest video game marathon lasted 138 hours and 34 seconds, was achieved by Terry Swidecki in the US, who played Just Dance in 2015. That's 5 days, 18 hours and 34 seconds continuously. Continuously. Somebody must have been feeding her something. I don't know how she peed, I mean, I can hold my bowels for 5 days if I have to, but you gotta pee, no sleep. it's probable that the folks who invented Just Dance did not invent it to be played for 5 days and 18 hours continuously. The thing is no longer being used for what it was meant to be used for. It's lost its function. If you woke up one morning, God forbid, God forbid and God protect you, you woke up one morning and you told your leg to swing over the side of the bed so you could get out of bed, and you assumed your leg would just do it. You told it to do, so you swung, so you swing yourself and you come to get out of bed and you fall flat because your leg is not doing anything. You and I would freak out, and we would go and find a hospital and speak to a neurologist and get an MRI and get an EMG. And if they told you that you can't get it today and there's a wait list, you would tell them, I'm not leaving here because I can't, because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. This is actually the story of a friend of mine who has multiple sclerosis. This is how she found out she had multiple sclerosis. She woke up one morning, swung her legs over the side of the bed to get up, and ended up on the floor. I was wondering, why am I on the floor? When something doesn't do what it's supposed to do, something is drastically wrong with it. Something is drastically wrong with it. But we don't feel that way. When we hear Jesus saying, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, we're like, why? So extreme, And I have a few suggestions about why we feel that's so extreme. Here's one of them. One of them is that we build familiarity. You probably heard about this experiment where you drop a frog into a pot of cold water and put him on the stove and put it on, medium temperature and let it boil, let the temperature come up slowly, right? And the frog doesn't do anything because they're cold-blooded animals. So they accommodate to their environment from a perspective of temperature until the water's boiling and now you've got boiled frog. And the frog dies in the water, right? Yeah, kind of sad, for the poor frog. But what about you and what about me? What about us? Do we accommodate to small changes in our lives? To small changes in society, to small changes in our way of thinking? Do we also have that ability to accommodate and to evolve and to accept things into our lives that we didn't accept previously? And you start from somewhere and you end up somewhere completely different, and you wonder, how did that gap happen? Why didn't you end up where you set out to? Why did you end up? Maybe it's our ability to accommodate. Maybe it's because these changes occur slowly. Or maybe it's because they're ours. I have a question for you, okay? Please pardon my French. I'm wrapping up here, okay? Why is it that other people always stink up the bathroom more than I do? Right? I was doing a marriage prep thing in another church. I was giving a talk in their marriage prep series. Got to hear one of their priests, the Indian Orthodox priest. I got to hear one of their priests saying, and he was saying, it's funny, but you only realize after you get married that everybody else's poo smells worse than yours. And he says, I'm not necessarily only talking about poo, I'm talking about your baggage, I'm talking about all that stuff in your life that you don't need. We're tolerant of our own baggage. Like I'm not very patient, I'm not a very patient person, and it's because people weren't patient with me when I was a kid and so on, but I'm doing my best. And if somebody else is impatient with me, it's like, how dare he? But with me, it's like, I cut myself some slack. That's what he was alluding to. But really, why is it that I can bring a magazine with me into the washroom, make the smell that is completely intolerable for any other human being, and sit there for 5 minutes in the stench? It's like a normal thing. They sell magazine racks that were made to be used in the washroom. They have a little toilet paper dispenser on the magazine rack. They were made for it. I'm not the only crazy one, right? Why is it that I can tolerate the stinky stuff in my life, and I know it stinks, and I hang onto it anyways? When am I going to start playing hot potato with the stinky stuff in my life and getting ready to throw it away from me as fast as possible. And my closing question for you is, what is your hot potato? Glory be to God forever. Let's pray.